The world did not end with a bang or a flash of light. It ended with a flicker. At first, no one noticed. A teenager in Mumbai scrolling through videos saw his screen stutter for half a second before returning to normal. A pilot flying over the Atlantic glanced at his instruments as they blinked once, then steadied. In living rooms from Buenos Aires to Berlin, television broadcasts cut out for 3 full seconds. Just long enough for people to glance up from their phones and wonder if the cable had gone out again. Then the message came. It did not arrive through one channel or another. It flooded everything at once. Radios in cars, smartphones in pockets, emergency alert systems. Even the digital billboards in Times Square, all of them displayed the same 17 words in whatever language. The viewer understood. Surrender. We have 12,000 warships encircling Earth. Panic did not erupt immediately. Disbelief came first. People laughed nervously. Someone in a Tokyo cafe joked that it was a marketing stunt for a new video game. A news anchor in London tried to continue her broadcast, assuming it was a hack, until her producer whispered in her ear that NASA had just confirmed something impossible. Outside, the sky remained blue. Birds still flew. The sun-warmed faces turned upward in confusion. But when people pointed their phones toward the heavens and zoomed in, they saw them not as tiny dots, but as massive, silent shapes hanging in perfect formation. Some looked like obsidian blades. Others resembled coiled rings or smooth ovals darker than space itself. They did not move. They did not glow. They simply existed where nothing should have been. A necklace of death wrapped around the planet in government bunkers deep beneath mountains. Military leaders stared at radar screens showing 12,000 contacts, no more. No less positioned with impossible precision. Not a single ship drifted. Not one broke formation. Fighter jets scrambled from air bases across the globe, but pilots reported the same thing. The objects were there, visible to the naked eye. Yet their instruments registered nothing solid. It was as if the ships existed just outside the rules of physics as humans understood them. On the streets, chaos unfolded in waves. The first wave was silence, a collective holding of breath as millions stepped outside and looked up. The second wave was noise. Car horns, shouting, the distant wail of sirens. A woman in a small town in Mexico clutched her child tighter and whispered prayers to a god who had never prepared her for this. An old man in rural Kenya watched the ships through a pair of cracked binoculars and simply nodded, as if he had always known this day would come. What terrified people most was not the threat itself, but the politeness of it. An invasion force with 12,000 warships could have glassed cities from orbit in minutes. They could have disabled power grids, poisoned water supplies, or dropped asteroids like divine punishment. Instead, they had issued a single word: surrender. As if asking permission. As if humanity's compliance mattered to beings who clearly held all the power. Scientists scrambled to make sense of it. Why surround the entire planet? Why not just target military installations or capitals? The answer came slowly, dawning on astrophysicists and strategists at the same horrifying moment. 12,000 ships wasn't an invasion force. It was an occupation force, big enough to control every inch of the planet's surface simultaneously. Big enough to ensure no resistance could ever form. Big enough to make fighting back not just futile, but mathematically impossible. Yet still, nothing happened. No weapons fired. No demands followed. The ships simply hung there, silent and patient, as if waiting for humanity to make a choice it never should have had to make. In a coastal village in the Philippines, a fisherman named Tomas lowered his net back into the water. His hands shook, but the rhythm of his work steadied him. His grandson stood beside him, small fingers gripping the boat's edge, eyes wide with fear. "Lolo," the boy whispered, "are they going to hurt us?" Thomas did not answer right away. He looked at the ships hanging over the horizon, then back at the sea, the same sea his father and grandfather had fished. He thought of all the storms he had survived, all the lean years, all the quiet joys of a simple life. Then he placed a weathered hand on his grandson's shoulder. "I don't know," he said softly, "but the sun still rises. The fish still swim. And we are still here." That small moment of courage repeated itself in thousands of variations across the globe. A nurse in Chicago finished her shift and went to work anyway. A baker in Paris opened his shop and placed warm bread in the window. A teacher in Nairobi gathered her students under a tree and began the day's lesson, though her voice trembled. They did not know if tomorrow would come, but they chose to live today. As night fell, the ships became more visible dark silhouettes against the stars, unmoving and absolute. People gathered on rooftops and hilltops, not in protest or prayer, but in shared witness. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder, passing water bottles and quiet words. Old grudges felt small beneath that sky. National borders meant nothing when every human being on Earth shared the same view. World leaders addressed their nations with carefully crafted speeches full of resolve and unity. But in private rooms, they admitted the truth. There were no options left. No weapons could reach orbit. No diplomacy could negotiate with an enemy that had not even identified itself. All they could do was wait, and so humanity waited. Not as nations or religions or political factions, but as something simpler as people. Parents held children tighter. Lovers spoke words long left unsaid. Friends sat together in silence, finding comfort not in answers, but in presence. The first day ended not with destruction, but with a question hanging in the air, heavier than any bomb. Why ask for surrender at all? If they could destroy us, why haven't they? And in that uncertainty, in that fragile space between threat and action, something unexpected took root. Not hope exactly, that felt too bold, but curiosity, a stubborn, human need to understand. Because the ships had not fired. They had not attacked. They had only spoken, and in a universe vast enough to hold 12,000 warships, that single word surrender sounded less like a threat and more like an invitation. Or perhaps a warning. No one slept much that night. But as dawn approached, painting the undersides of the silent fleet in pale gold, a strange calm settled over the world. The fear remained, but beneath it ran a current of something else, something ancient and resilient. The realization that whatever came next, humanity would face it together. Not as heroes or victims, but as witnesses to a moment that would define their species forever. The ship still hung in the sky, silent, waiting, and for the first time since, the message arrived. People began to wonder not what the aliens wanted from them, but what they wanted from the aliens. 3 days passed. 72 hours of silence from the sky. The ships didn't move. They didn't fire. They didn't even blink. And that was somehow worse than if they'd attacked at first. People expected something to happen every minute, every hour. But as the sun rose and set again and again, the world settled into a strange new rhythm. Grocery stores stayed open, though shelves emptied faster than trucks could refill them. Schools tried to hold classes, but teachers and students kept glancing out windows. Factories slowed down. Planes still flew, but fewer of them. Everyone was waiting for an order, a signal, a reason. Governments issued statements urging calm. "We are in communication," they said. But no one believed it. If real communication were happening, wouldn't someone have told us what the aliens wanted? Why ask for surrender and then say nothing? In cities, protests grew not angry mobs, but quiet gatherings. People held candles, signs with questions instead of demands. Why are you here? What do you want? Are we alone in this? In rural towns, neighbors checked on each other more often. Old fences between properties seemed less important now. A shared sky made old divisions feel small, but not everyone waited peacefully. Some armed themselves. Others hoarded supplies. A few extremist groups claimed the fleet was divine judgment or humanity's salvation. Conspiracy theories spread like wildfire online, then fizzled when no proof ever surfaced. Truth was, no one knew anything for sure. Only that 12,000 silent ships hung above them, watching. Then, something changed, though almost no one noticed at first thought in Chile. High in the Atacama Desert, where the air is thin and the stars burn bright, a young astronomer sat alone in a small observatory. She hadn't slept much since the arrival. Like everyone else, she'd stared at the fleet through her telescope, trying to understand its shape, its pattern. Most assumed the ships were randomly placed or arranged for tactical advantage. But as she mapped their positions night after night, a pattern emerged, one so precise it couldn't be accidental. The ships weren't just surrounding Earth. They formed a geometric structure, like a cage made of angles and symmetry, built not for war, but for containment. It reminded her of something she'd once read about ancient physics. Theoretical shields designed not to keep things out, but to keep something in. She sent her findings to colleagues around the world. Most ignored her. Too tired. Too scared. But one message got through to a marine research station off the coast of Japan. There, a team had been monitoring unusual activity in the deep ocean. Not earthquakes. Not volcanic shifts. Something stranger. For the past 2 days, the water directly beneath the nearest alien ship had begun to glow a soft, pulsing blue light, visible only through deep-sea cameras. No heat, no radiation. Just light rising from trenches older than human civilization. When the astronomers' data reached them, they compared coordinates. The glowing patch lined up perfectly with one of the fleet's anchor points. Then they checked other locations. Off the coast of Peru, near the Mariana Trench, in the Arctic Ocean. Each matched the ship's position exactly. Something was happening under the sea. And the fleet wasn't here to conquer Earth. They were here because of what lay beneath it. News of this didn't go public right away. Scientists feared panic. But whispers leaked. Online forums buzzed with rumors of ancient things waking up. Religious leaders spoke of prophecies. Governments denied everything until satellite images showed the ocean glowing in 12 exact spots, each directly below a ship. Now, fear took a new shape. It wasn't just about beings from the stars. It was about something buried in the planet itself, something the aliens clearly feared enough to surround the entire world. In fishing villages along coastlines, people stopped going out to sea. Nets came in empty, not because there were no fish, but because the fish had vanished, fleeing something deeper. Divers reported strange vibrations in the water, like a heartbeat echoing from miles below. Yet life went on. A child in Oslo drew a picture of the ships and taped it to her window. A musician in Lagos played guitar on his rooftop every evening, saying music was the only thing that made sense anymore. An elderly couple in Vancouver sat on their porch each morning, sipping tea and watching the sky, refusing to let fear steal their routine. What kept people grounded wasn't bravery. It was stubbornness. The simple refusal to let mystery erase the ordinary. Laundry still needed washing. Meals still needed cooking. Babies still cried in the night. But beneath that surface normalcy, minds raced. If the aliens weren't invaders, what were they? Guardians? Prison wardens? Had Earth been a prison all along, and humanity just the unaware tenants? Then, on the fourth night, something shifted in the sky. One ship, just one, tilted slightly. Not enough to alarm radar systems, but enough for those watching with binoculars to notice. It angled downward, as if listening to the ocean below. Minutes later, the blue glow beneath it intensified, spreading like ink in water. No one attacked. No alarm sounded. But for the first time, people sensed movement in the standoff. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of waiting on both sides. And in that moment, a new question formed in millions of minds. Quiet but urgent. What if the real threat isn't up there, but down here? The world held its breath again, not in terror, but in dawning understanding. The surrender demand might not have been aimed at humanity at all. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe the aliens weren't asking humans to give up, but to stay out of the way, because whatever slept beneath the ocean floor, it was starting to stir. And 12,000 warships might not be enough to stop it. The truth arrived not with a bang, but with a whisper from the deep. It began with a research vessel drifting silently above the Mariana Trench. The crew had been sent by a coalition of nervous governments to investigate the glowing waters. They lowered cameras into the blackness, past where sunlight ever reached, past where pressure crushed submarines like tin cans. What they found made their hands shake so badly the footage blurred for 30 seconds. Before anyone could speak, there were structures down there. Not rocks shaped by time, not volcanic formations. These were angles too perfect, curves too deliberate. Towers of black stone covered in spiraling patterns that seemed to shift when stared at too long. And at the center of it all, a circular opening like a mouth pulsing with that same soft blue light now visible from space. The ruins stretched for miles, older than any human civilization, older than continents had their current shape. This wasn't a city built by humanity's ancestors. This was something that had been here long before humans walked upright. When the footage leaked, because of course it leaked, the world didn't panic. It went quiet. A different kind of quiet than before. Not the silence of waiting, but the silence of understanding something too large to process all at once. Scientists who had spent careers studying ancient history now faced a humbling truth. Human history was a footnote. A brief recent flicker on a planet that had hosted other stories, older, stranger ones. Religious leaders grappled with texts that never mentioned what slept beneath the waves. Parents held their children tighter, not out of fear of the ships above, but out of a sudden awareness that the ground beneath their feet and the oceans covering most of it held secrets they were never meant to uncover. Then came the second discovery. In caves beneath Antarctica, in desert basins in Australia, in deep rock layers across every continent, teams found matching symbols carved into stone. The same spirals, the same patterns, left not thousands of years ago, but millions. This wasn't just an oceanic phenomenon. Whatever had been here had touched the entire planet, and then it had gone dormant, or been put to sleep. The alien fleet's message suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. They weren't invaders. They were prison guards, a marine biologist who had spent 30 years studying deep-sea life broke down during a live interview. Not from fear, but from grief. "We thought we were alone on this planet," she said, tears tracing paths through the exhaustion on her face. "We argued over borders and beliefs while something ancient slept beneath us. And now we've woken it up. Or it's waking on its own. And these beings from the stars, they've seen this before. They know what happens next." Across the globe, people gathered around screens, around radios, around each other. The conversation shifted. It was no longer, "What do the aliens want from us?" but "What did we inherit when we inherited this world?" In a small coastal town in Portugal, fishermen who had spent generations reading the sea noticed changes they couldn't explain. Fish swam in strange patterns. Whales sang songs no one had ever recorded. The water itself felt different, charged, like the air before a storm. An old fisherman sat on the dock mending nets, his gnarled hands moving automatically, while his eyes stayed fixed on the horizon where one of the alien ships hung silently. His grandson joined him, small feet dangling over the water. "Do you think it's angry?" the boy asked softly. The old man shook his head. "I don't think it has feelings like ours. It just is. Like the tide. Like the wind. And sometimes the tide takes things. Not because it hates you. Just because that's what tides do." That simple truth settled over humanity like dust after an earthquake. The thing beneath the ocean wasn't evil. It wasn't good. It simply existed. And its existence might not leave room for humanity's. Yet something unexpected happened in the days that followed. Instead of collapsing into despair, people began reaching out. Not to governments or militaries, to each other. Strangers shared food in apartment hallways. Neighbors taught each other skills, how to purify water, how to grow food in small spaces, how to stay calm when the world made no sense. Social media, once a place of argument and performance, filled with quiet messages. "I'm here if you need to talk. My garden has extra tomatoes. I'm scared too." It was as if facing a threat beyond human scale had burned away the trivial. Arguments over politics or celebrity gossip felt absurd when ancient ruins, pulsed with light beneath the sea, and 12,000 silent ships watched from above. People weren't becoming heroes. They were becoming human again. Present. Tender. Aware of how fragile and precious ordinary life really was. Then, the ocean began to change. The blue glow intensified, spreading beyond the 12 original points. Current shifted. Water temperatures rose slightly in deep trenches. Marine biologists reported mass migrations, creatures moving away from the light, as if fleeing something only they could sense. And for the first time since their arrival, the alien fleet moved. Not aggressively, not toward Earth, but their formation tightened, the geometric pattern becoming more precise, more focused. Like a net being drawn closed. A message came not through broadcast this time, but through dreams that people across the planet began experiencing the same vision during sleep. A world of towering crystal forests under a violet sky. Cities of light humming with peaceful energy. Then darkness, not an invasion, but an unraveling. The light fading. The cities crumbling not from attack, but from within. A silent consumption. A presence that didn't destroy life so much as replace it, rewrite it, until nothing remained but a hollow echo wearing the shape of what had been. The vision ended with a single feeling, not words, but understanding. This has happened before. On many worlds. We are here to stop it from happening again. When people woke, they didn't scream. They wept, not for themselves, but for those lost worlds. For the loneliness of beings who traveled to stars not to conquer, but to contain horrors they could never fully defeat, only delay. The surrender demand was never about humanity giving up weapons or governments. It was about surrendering pride. Surrendering the belief that Earth belonged to humans alone. Surrendering the hope that they could handle this on their own. Standing on beaches from Thailand to Brazil to California, people watched the glowing waters and understood their place in the story. They were not the main characters. They were bystanders who had accidentally wandered onto a battlefield older than their species. The real fight wasn't between humans and aliens. It was between containment and awakening. Between silence and song. Between what slept beneath the waves and the weary guardians who had come to ensure it never woke fully again. And in that understanding, a strange peace settled over many hearts. The fear didn't vanish, but it lost its sharp edges. Because now they knew the ships above weren't enemies. They were witnesses. Just like humanity. And sometimes, the most courageous thing a species could do was stand quietly beside others and face the dark together. The ocean pulsed brighter that night. The ships held their formation. And on the shores of every continent, people lit candles, not as protest or prayer, but as acknowledgement. A small human light answering the ancient glow from the deep. A message of its own. We see you. We are here. And we are not alone. The choice arrived not as a command, but as a question whispered. The aliens spoke again, but not through radios or satellites this time. They spoke inside people's minds. It didn't feel like a voice. More like a memory that wasn't yours. A sudden knowing, clear and calm, arriving in the quiet moments while washing dishes, walking the dog, staring out a rain-streaked window. And what they showed wasn't words. It was feeling, images, truths too big for language. They showed a world covered in soft silver forests, where creatures moved like liquid light, peaceful, whole. Then, from deep underground, a slow pulse, gentle at first, almost beautiful. But then the ground cracked. The trees turned gray. The creatures didn't die. They changed, became hollow. Their eyes still shone, but there was nothing behind them. Just repetition, mimicry, a perfect copy with no soul. Then another world, another fall, and another. Dozens of them, all ending the same way, not with fire or war, but with silence. With something ancient waking up and rewriting everything it touched until nothing original remained. Life didn't end, it just forgot itself. And now Earth stood on that same edge. The message wasn't spoken, it was understood. Surrender means letting us seal it away. Forever. The process will burn the oceans. Sterilize the crust. Your world will live, but not as it is. Not for centuries. That was the choice. Not fight or flee. Not win or lose. But save the planet by losing it. Or risk everything hoping humanity could control or survive what was rising from below. Arguments broke out everywhere. In homes, online, in town squares. Some said, let them do it. Better a dead world than one turned into a ghost. Others cried, this is our home. We won't hand it over without trying to protect it ourselves. Parents argued with children. Scientists with soldiers. Priests with politicians. Everyone wanted to believe there was another way, but no one could name it. In a university lab in Canada, a group of researchers worked through the night, analyzing every scrap of data from the deep-sea ruins. One young student, barely out of her teens, noticed something others had missed. The symbols weren't just carvings, they were instructions. Or maybe an invitation. Patterns that matched human brainwave frequencies when people meditated or dreamed. As if whoever built those ruins hadn't just lived here. They had tried to communicate with minds like ours long ago. She shared her findings with a global network of linguists, neuroscientists, and oceanographers who had been quietly collaborating since day one. Most governments had given up on talking to the aliens, but ordinary people hadn't. They'd been listening, watching, connecting dots the powerful had ignored. Meanwhile, in cities across the world, people began gathering, not to protest, but to share dreams. Because after the vision, thousands reported the same thing. They'd seen the alien worlds fall, yes, but they'd also sensed something else. A thread of connection between the sleeping presence below and the life above. Not hatred, not hunger. Just loneliness. A being so old it had forgotten how to speak, only how to echo. Could it be reasoned with? Could it be calmed? No one knew. But the idea took root like a seed in dry soil, fragile but stubborn. A retired engineer in Greece built a simple device from spare parts, a transmitter that pulsed low-frequency sound into the ocean, mimicking whale songs mixed with patterns from the ruins. He didn't expect the reply. He just wanted to say, we're here. We see you. To his shock, the blue glow beneath the waves pulsed back in rhythm. In Brazil, a group of indigenous elders held a ceremony on the shore, singing songs older than written history, songs about earth and water and balance. They didn't see the deep presence as a monster. They saw it as a spirit that had slept too long and now dreamed in nightmares. Their offering wasn't weapons or surrender. It was respect. These small acts spread, not as movements, but as whispers. A musician in South Korea composed a piece using frequencies from the ruins and played it into the sea through underwater speakers. A teacher in Kenya had her students draw pictures of peace and lower them in waterproof tubes to the ocean floor near glowing zones. None of it was grand. None of it promised victory. But it was human, real, full of care instead of fear. The aliens watched. And for the first time, their ship shifted not in threat, but in curiosity. Then came the hardest truth. Full surrender meant accepting that humanity might not survive the cleansing. Even if the planet healed, civilization could collapse. Crops would fail. Oceans would boil for decades. Billions could die. Was that sacrifice worth saving future life, even if humans weren't part of it? Families sat together in dim rooms, holding hands, asking questions no parent should have to answer. Will we be gone before I grow up? Is it selfish to want to stay? There were no easy answers. Only love, heavy and quiet. But something changed in those conversations. People stopped thinking only of survival. They started thinking of meaning, of legacy, of what kind of species they wanted to be in their final days, if these were their final days. Baker in Istanbul gave away all his bread one morning, saying, "If this is the end, let no one go hungry." A nurse in Manila walked miles to check on elderly neighbors, not because she had to, but because she could. Artists painted murals on empty walls, showing humans and aliens standing side by side, not as enemies, but as witnesses to something greater than either. And then, a breakthrough. The global team of scientists, dreamers, and listeners sent a unified signal, not a demand, not a plea, but a question. Using sound, light, and patterns from the ruins, they asked, "Can we help?" For 12 hours, nothing happened. Then, one alien ship just lowered slowly toward the Pacific Ocean, not to attack, not to seal, but to hover, silent and still, above the brightest glow dot, and in that moment, the world understood. The aliens weren't waiting for surrender. They were waiting for partnership. Because maybe containment didn't have to mean destruction. Maybe healing didn't require erasure. Maybe, just maybe, a species that sang to the deep and drew pictures for ancient spirits could offer something the galaxy's weary guardians had forgotten. Not force, but tenderness. The choice was no longer between giving up or fighting back. It was between facing the unknown alone or together. And for the first time since the fleet arrived, hope didn't feel foolish. It felt like the bravest thing left to do. The ship descended slowly, like a leaf settling on still water. It made no sound. No wind stirred. It simply lowered itself toward the glowing patch of ocean, stopping just meters above the surface. People gathered on shorelines around the world, watched through binoculars, phone cameras, or just with their own eyes, holding their breath, not in fear, but in wonder. This wasn't an invasion. It wasn't a surrender. It was an invitation. On a small research boat bobbing gently in the Pacific, a handful of scientists and volunteers waited. They weren't soldiers. They weren't diplomats. They were a marine biologist who loved coral reefs, a linguist who studied forgotten languages, a musician who played cello, and a young woman who had spent her life listening to whale songs. They carried no weapons. Only speakers playing soft, patterned sounds, blends of human music, whale calls, and the spiraling cymbals from the deep-sea ruins. It was a fragile offering. A hello. For hours, nothing happened. The ship hovered. The ocean glowed. The humans waited, their hands clasped not in prayer, but in shared presence. Then, a change. The blue light beneath the waves softened, not fading, but shifting. The sharp, electric pulse became a gentle rhythm, like a heartbeat settling after a long run. And from the underside of the alien vessel, a light emerged, not harsh or blinding, but warm gold, spreading across the water like sunrise. No words came. No demands. Instead, a feeling washed over everyone on the boat, and somehow, across the planet, a sense of recognition. Not friendship exactly. Not trust yet, but acknowledgement. We see you. You see us. And between us, something else stirs. Deep below. The ancient presence didn't vanish. It didn't surrender. It simply quieted. Like a child who had been crying in the dark and finally heard a familiar voice. The ruins on the ocean floor stopped pulsing with urgency. The symbols carved into stone seemed to relax, their edges softening in the camera's view. The thing that had slept for millions of years wasn't evil. It was lonely. And in its loneliness, it had begun to dream, and its dreams were spilling into reality, threatening to overwrite the world above. The aliens hadn't come to destroy Earth. They had come to help a younger species face what they themselves had faced long ago. Not a monster to slay, but a wounded consciousness to comfort. One by one, other ships across the globe began to lower, not all the way to the surface, but closer. Near coastlines in Norway, Indonesia, Chile, Canada. In each place, people gathered. Not with guns or flags, but with offerings. Fishermen lowered baskets of fruit into glowing waters. Children placed drawings in waterproof containers and set them adrift. Elders sang songs passed down through generations, songs about earth, water, sky, and the spaces between. It wasn't a strategy. It was instinct. The human way of saying, "You are not alone." And something answered. Not in words. In resonance. The ocean's glow began to pulse in time with human heartbeats. Cameras captured schools of fish moving in patterns that mirrored the alien symbols. Whales sang new songs that scientists couldn't explain, melodies that felt like conversation. The boundary between what was human, alien, and ancient began to blur. Not in a frightening way, but in a healing one. As if Earth itself was remembering a language it had forgotten. Weeks passed. The ships remained, but their posture changed. No longer a cage. More like a circle of witnesses. Scientists and alien observers never seen directly, but felt through gentle exchanges of light and sound, began working together. Not sharing technology or weapons. Sharing understanding. Humans offered what they knew of Earth's rhythm, seasons, tides, the slow patience of forests growing. The aliens offered what they knew of cosmic balance, how to hold space for something wounded without crushing it, how to guide without controlling. The ancient presence never fully woke. It never spoke in words humans could translate, but it stopped straining against its sleep. The blue glow faded to a soft shimmer, then to occasional flickers like distant stars seen through deep water. The crisis had passed not through force, but through presence. Through the simple, radical act of showing up and saying, "We're here with you." Life on the surface changed slowly. Not overnight. Not with miracles. But with small shifts. People spent more time outside. They looked at the sky not with fear, but with curiosity. They listened to the ocean not as a resource to exploit, but as a neighbor to respect. Arguments over borders and beliefs didn't vanish, but they lost their sharpness. When you stood beside strangers on a beach, sharing silence beneath alien ships while something ancient dreams beneath your feet, political divisions start to feel like rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. And this ship, Earth, wasn't sinking. It was healing. Years later, the ships began to leave. Not all at once. One by one, they lifted silently back into the sky, their work done. The last one hovered for 3 full days above the Pacific, as if reluctant to go. Then it rose, joining the others until the sky was empty again. just stars and moon and sun, as it had been before, but nothing was the same. Humanity had learned something that couldn't be unlearned. They were not the center of the story. They were participants in something vast and old and tender. The universe wasn't cold or cruel. It was full of beings carrying quiet burdens, trying to help each other through the dark. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you could offer wasn't strength or intelligence, but kindness. A song in the dark. A hand held out not to take, but to share. Children born after the departure grew up hearing the story not as a warning, but as a beginning. They learned to listen to oceans, to forests, to silence. They built telescopes not to search for enemies, but to say hello to distant friends who might one day need help of their own. And sometimes, on clear nights, people still gather on beaches and hilltops. They don't look up expecting ships. They look down at the water, at the earth beneath their feet, and they listen. Not for threats, for whispers, for the quiet pulse of a world that survived not by fighting, but by caring. The surrender demand had been misunderstood from the start. It was never about giving up. It was about giving in to humility, to connection, to the truth that no one faces the dark alone. The fleet had come expecting to contain a catastrophe. They left having witnessed something rarer, a species choosing tenderness over terror. And in doing so, humanity hadn't saved the world. They had remembered how to belong to it. The ships were gone. The sky was empty. But the lesson remained, written not in stone or signal, but in the way people now held each other's hands a little tighter, listened a little longer, and looked at the ocean not with fear, but with quiet gratitude for the ancient dreamer sleeping peacefully below, and for the long journey home they had all taken together.